I woke up alone with 3 broken ribs while my family vanished for 5 days. When my sister finally returned and asked if I had been discharged yet, the nurse's one-sentence reply left her frozen in shock. For 15 years, I was the disgrace of the family. The black sheep who dropped out of Spelman College refused to join the church choir and buried her face in a beat-up laptop. They called me useless. Until 5 days ago, when that so-called uselessness almost cost me my life. But they had no idea that my fall down the stairs that day had officially broken the very last chain holding me back. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to cut off toxic family members to protect your peace. The rhythmic sterile beeping of a heart monitor was the first sound that pierced the heavy darkness of my unconscious mind. I tried to draw a deep breath, but a sharp, blinding pain tore through the right side of my chest, forcing a ragged gasp from my lips. My eyelids felt like they were weighted down with lead. When I finally forced them open, the harsh fluorescent lights of an intensive care unit at Atlanta General Hospital burned my eyes. I blinked against the sterile glare, waiting for my vision to clear. I slowly turned my head, fighting a wave of nausea and a pounding ache at the base of my skull. The room was completely empty. There were no balloons taped to the bed rails. There were no flowers sitting on the tray table. There was no anxious mother wringing her hands, no father pacing the floor, and certainly no sister shedding tears of concern. There was just me tangled in IV lines and the cold, clinical hum of medical machinery keeping me tethered to reality. I tried to speak, but my throat was as dry as sandpaper. I pressed the call button clipped to my bedsheet. Within moments, a nurse with kind eyes and a tired smile walked into the room. He checked the monitors, silencing a quiet alarm, before looking down at me with an expression I could only describe as profound pity. "You are finally awake, Aisha," he said, gently adjusting the flow of an IV bag above my head. "You gave us quite a scare. Where is my family?" The words scraped against my vocal cords. It took every ounce of strength I possessed just to form that simple sentence. The nurse paused, his hand stilling on the tubing. He looked away for a fraction of a second before meeting my gaze again. The evasion told me everything I needed to know before he even opened his mouth. "They left shortly after you were admitted," he replied softly. "They said they had travel arrangements that could not be altered. I am sorry, Aisha, but they did leave your personal belongings." He opened a plastic hospital bag sitting on the chair in the corner and pulled out my phone. He placed it carefully in my uninjured hand. "I will give you a moment," he said, stepping out of the room and closing the heavy glass door behind him. I lay there for a long time, the cold weight of the phone pressing into my palm. My chest throbbed with every shallow breath. I pressed the power button. The screen illuminated the dim room. There were no missed calls. There were no frantic voicemails asking if I had woken up. There was only one notification that mattered. It was a message in our family group chat, a chat ironically titled "The Blessed Family." I tapped the notification, my thumb trembling slightly. The message was from my older sister Vanessa, the golden child who had married a wealthy white real estate developer named Trent. The sister who had always viewed my existence as a stain on her perfectly curated life. "You have done enough to seek attention for 1 week, Aisha," the message read. "The doctor said you just have a minor sprain and some bruising. Stop playing the victim. Trent already paid for the entire family to fly out to a resort in Miami, and we are not going to let your childish tantrums ruin Mom and Dad's vacation. When they finally discharge you, just catch an Uber home. And do not bother calling us. We are turning our phones off to enjoy some actual peace and quiet." Attached to the text was a high-resolution photograph. I stared at the screen, my heart turning into a block of ice. It was a selfie taken in the luxurious first-class cabin of a commercial airliner. Vanessa was front and center, flashing her brilliant, cosmetically perfected smile, her hair flawlessly styled. Behind her sat our parents, Brenda and Desmond, clinking crystal champagne flutes together, looking more relaxed and joyous than I had seen them in years. And leaning over the aisle seat was Trent, raising his own glass to the camera with a smug, self-satisfied smirk. They were toasting, They were literally celebrating while I was lying in an intensive care unit hooked up to machines. I zoomed in on Trent's face. The man who had constantly belittled my career choices, who had mocked my community, and who had stood at the top of those stairs 5 days ago, watching his wife push me down them. The memory flashed behind my eyes with sickening clarity. We had been standing in my grandfather's historic brick house near Spelman College. Trent wanted to bulldoze the heritage site to build high-end condos for his wealthy white investors. When I refused to sign over my 50% ownership, Vanessa had exploded. She screamed that I was just a college dropout, writing useless code demanding I sign the papers to secure Trent's future. When I turned to walk away, she lunged. She used both hands, shoving me forcefully between my shoulder blades. I remember the terrifying weightlessness, the brutal impact of concrete against my ribs, and the sickening crack of my skull. As I lay bleeding at the bottom of the steps, my mother Brenda had simply looked down and told Trent that I had tripped myself, urging them to call an ambulance quickly so they would not miss their flight. He had paid for this trip. He had bought their loyalty, effectively purchasing my parents' silence and complicity with a luxury vacation. They had traded their daughter's well-being for first-class tickets and ocean views. I slowly turned my head toward the foot of the bed, where my medical chart hung from a plastic clipboard. The pain in my chest was agonizing, a physical manifestation of the betrayal I was reading on my phone. I reached out, pulling the clipboard toward me. I flipped past the medication logs until I found the attending physician's admission notes. Patient admitted with severe blunt force trauma, the notes read. Diagnoses include 3 fractured ribs on the right side, a partially collapsed lung, requiring immediate stabilization, and a subdural concussion resulting from a significant impact to the posterior skull. I stared at the black and white text. 3 broken ribs, a collapsed lung, a severe concussion. This was the minor sprain my sister had casually dismissed. This was the childish tantrum that was supposedly ruining their vacation. They had not just abandoned me. They had actively gaslit the reality of my condition to justify leaving me behind. They had convinced themselves and each other that my near-fatal injuries were nothing more than an inconvenience to their social calendar. I set the clipboard down on the mattress. Strangely, I did not cry. There were no tears left for these people. For years, I had absorbed their subtle digs, their overt insults, and their constant disappointment. I had endured the lectures about how I was throwing my life away by not conforming to their standards of success. I had stayed silent while Trent made racially coded jokes about the historic neighborhood I lived in, the very neighborhood he was trying to gentrify and destroy. I had taken it all because they were family, because the church taught us that blood was thicker than water, that forgiveness was a virtue, that you honor your parents no matter what. But as I lay in that sterile hospital bed, breathing through the agonizing pain of my fractured ribs, I realized that blood had only ever been a weapon they used to keep me bleeding. The family dynamic was not a bond, it was a hostage situation. And Trent was the ultimate puppeteer. He thought his money made him untouchable. He thought a Miami vacation could sweep an attempted murder under the rug. He thought I was just a broke college dropout who braided hair on the side. He had no idea what I had actually been doing with my life for the past decade. He had no idea the empire I had quietly built while they were busy mocking my struggles. A cold, profound sense of calm washed over me. It started in my toes and spread upward, neutralizing the physical pain, freezing the emotional wounds. The little girl who just wanted her parents to be proud of her died on those concrete stairs 5 days ago. The woman who woke up in this hospital bed was someone entirely different. I picked up my phone again. I closed the family group chat, not bothering to type a reply. They wanted to enjoy their peace and quiet. I would let them. I swiped away the photo of their smiling faces and opened a secure encrypted messaging application hidden deep within a folder on my home screen. I tapped on a private contact. Not a friend or a nurse, but my chief operating officer and lead legal counsel. The man who managed the daily operations of a tech conglomerate that no one in my family knew I owned. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard, the physical pain in my body fueling every keystroke. I am awake, I typed. And I am done playing their game. Initiate the takeover protocol immediately. Freeze all secondary accounts linked to Trent's firm. Start the acquisition process. It is time to burn it all down. I hit send and watched the message turn green. I locked the screen, letting the phone drop onto the bedsheets. The heart monitor beside me beeped at a steady, rhythmic pace. I turned my head to look out the small window of my hospital room, watching the Atlanta skyline shimmer against the night sky. They thought they had left me with nothing but a hospital bill and a broken body. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had left me with absolute clarity. And as I stared at the city lights, a slow, dark smile crept across my face. Their luxurious vacation in Miami was about to become the most expensive trip of their lives. The sharp throbbing in my ribs pulled me away from the glowing city lights and dragged me right back to the very moment this nightmare started. 5 days ago, I was standing in the foyer of my grandfather's house, breathing in the familiar scent of aged pine wood and sweetgrass. That house was a cornerstone of the Sweet Auburn district, a piece of deep history sitting proudly near the Spelman College campus, where I had once been a student. It was a sanctuary for generations of our community. But to Trent, my sister's husband, it was nothing more than an obstacle in the way of a massive payout. Trent stood over my grandfather's antique dining table, his pale hands smoothing down the edges of a glossy architectural blueprint. He was explaining his vision with that grating, patronizing tone he reserved specifically for me. He pointed to the blueprints detailing how he was going to bulldoze the historic red brick structure and replace it with a towering complex of luxury condominiums. He talked about bringing value to the neighborhood, which was just his sterile corporate code word for pushing out the black families who had lived there for decades and replacing them with his wealthy white investors. I stood my ground at the opposite end of the table. I held the original deed in my hands. Grandfather had left exactly 50% of the property to me, knowing I was the only one who truly understood its worth. The other half belonged to Vanessa, and she had practically handed it to Trent on a silver platter the moment the ink dried. I told Trent the answer was no. I told him I would never sign over my share of the property, not for any amount of money, and certainly not to watch him erase our heritage to build a coffee shop and a cycling studio. Trent sighed heavily, pinching the bridge of his nose like he was dealing with an unruly toddler. He looked at Vanessa, giving her that silent, expectant stare that demanded she handle her problematic family member. Vanessa stepped up immediately, her designer heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She snatched the blueprints from the table and shoved the transfer agreement in my face. She screamed that I was being ridiculously selfish. She told me I was nothing but a college dropout, wasting my life away writing useless lines of code in a dark room while Trent was a top-tier real estate developer trying to secure their future. She yelled that I was embarrassing the family, that my refusal to cooperate was just another pathetic cry for attention from the sister who had failed out of a prestigious university just to go braid hair for a few dollars. I looked past her to the doorway where our parents, Beatrice and Desmond, stood with their matching leather luggage already packed for Miami. I asked them to intervene. I asked them how they could stand by and watch Trent tear down the house where my father grew up. My father looked away, suddenly very interested in checking the flight itinerary on his phone. He always took the path of least resistance, especially when Trent was footing the bill. My mother, Beatrice, simply adjusted her silk scarf and glared at me. She told me to stop being difficult. She said Trent was doing us a favor, that the house was old and useless, much like my stubborn attitude. She demanded I sign the paper right then and there so they could head to the airport in peace. I refused again. I folded the deed, put it in my bag, and turned my back on them. I walked toward the heavy oak front door, stepping out onto the high stone porch. The steep concrete steps stretched down to the sidewalk below. I did not even hear Vanessa coming. She rushed out the front door after me, screaming that I was not going to ruin her husband's multi-million-dollar deal. She grabbed my shoulder, yanking me backward. I stumbled, trying to regain my balance on the edge of the top step. I told her to let me go. I reached for the railing, but she slapped my hand away. She lunged forward. She did not just push me. She planted both of her hands squarely against my chest and shoved with every ounce of force she had. My feet slipped off the edge of the stone. For one terrifying heartbeat, there was nothing but empty air beneath me. Then gravity took over. My body slammed into the sharp concrete edge of the first step. The impact knocked the breath out of my lungs in a violent rush. I tumbled downward, my shoulder hitting the stone, then my hip, then my ribs. A sickening crack echoed in my ears as my chest took the brunt of the fall. Finally, the back of my head struck the bottom step with a blinding flash of white light. I lay sprawled on the concrete walkway. Every nerve in my body was screaming in agony. I could not breathe. I could not move my arms. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. Through my blurred, darkening vision, I looked up the steep flight of stairs. Vanessa was standing at the top, her hands still raised in front of her, breathing heavily. Trent stepped out beside her, looking down at my broken body with an expression of mild annoyance. Then my mother stepped out onto the porch. I tried to call out to her. I tried to ask for help, but the only sound that escaped my lips was a wet, rattling gasp. Beatrice did not run down the stairs. She did not scream for help. She calmly looked at her diamond wristwatch. Then she turned to Trent and spoke with a voice completely devoid of any human emotion. She tripped Trent. "Call an ambulance so we do not miss our flight." Those were the last words I heard before the darkness swallowed me whole. She tripped. My mother had watched her eldest daughter commit attempted murder, and her only concern was making sure the tragedy did not delay her first-class vacation. The harsh click of the hospital room door opening snapped me violently out of the memory. The sterile smell of the intensive care unit rushed back into my senses. I turned my head on the thin pillow, my heart rate accelerating on the monitor beside me. A doctor walked into the room. He was a tall man with a grim, deeply uncomfortable expression on his face. He was not looking at me with the usual bedside sympathy. He was looking at me like I was a liability. He carried a thick yellow folder tightly against his chest. I asked him when I could leave. I told him I needed to get out of this bed. He stopped at the foot of my bed, avoiding direct eye contact as he opened the folder. He cleared his throat nervously. "I am afraid that is not going to be possible, Aisha," he said, his voice flat and clinical. "I just received an email from your family's legal representative. They have activated a medical power of attorney. According to the documents provided by your sister and her husband, you have been declared mentally unfit to make your own medical or financial decisions due to your traumatic brain injury. They have arranged for a private transport. We are transferring you to a psychiatric care facility in 1 hour." I spent the next 5 days in that hospital room waiting in absolute silence. I did not argue with the doctors. I did not throw a fit when the nurses checked my vitals or adjusted my bandages. I needed them to believe I was docile, weak, and exactly as helpless as my family claimed I was. The pain in my fractured ribs was a constant, sharp reminder with every breath I took, but it kept me grounded. It kept my mind razor sharp. I used the hospital Wi-Fi to stay in constant contact with my team. While my family was sipping margaritas and soaking up the Florida sun, I was orchestrating the systematic dismantling of Trent's entire real estate empire from a sterile bed in Atlanta. On the morning of the 5th day, the heavy wooden door to my private room did not simply open. It was pushed wide open with the kind of arrogant force that announced exactly who was stepping through the frame. They did not knock. They did not ask the nurses for permission to enter. They just strolled in like they owned the building. Trent walked in first. His skin was roasted to a crisp Miami pink, and he was wearing a tailored linen shirt, unbuttoned just enough to display his supreme, unearned confidence. He smelled like expensive coconut sunscreen and aged rum, a nauseating contrast to the clinical scent of antiseptic that had surrounded me all week. Vanessa was right behind him. My sister looked like she had just stepped off a yacht. She wore a breezy designer sundress, her hair braided perfectly with a pair of oversized sunglasses pushed up onto her head. She looked completely refreshed. There was not a single trace of guilt on her face, not a single shadow of remorse in her eyes for the fact that her own 2 hands had violently shoved me down a flight of concrete stairs. My parents, Brenda and Desmond, trailed in behind them. My father was busy checking his golf handicap on his phone, barely glancing in my direction. My mother adjusted the strap of her leather tote bag and let out a long, dramatic sigh, looking around my hospital room as if my near-fatal injury was a personal inconvenience to her social calendar. And they were not alone. Trailing behind my family was a man I did not recognize. He wore a sharp gray suit and carried a thick leather briefcase. He had the rigid, emotionless posture of a corporate bulldog. A lawyer. They had actually brought a lawyer to my hospital room. Trent did not ask how I was feeling. He did not ask if my lung had healed or if the swelling in my brain had gone down. He marched straight to the foot of my bed, completely invading my space, and dropped a heavy stack of legal documents right onto my lap. The vacation is over, Aisha. Trent announced, his voice dripping with condescension. I am tired of playing these games with you. My investors are getting impatient, and I am not going to let a stubborn unemployed dropout hold up a $50 million development project. I looked down at the thick stack of paper. The top sheet was a standard property transfer agreement. The second sheet was something much worse. It was a medical power of attorney, granting Vanessa full control over my medical and psychiatric care. Vanessa stepped up beside her husband, crossing her arms over her chest. You need help, Aisha, she said. Her voice laced with that fake syrupy concern she always used when she was trying to manipulate a situation. Throwing yourself down the stairs just to spite my husband. That is not normal behavior. It is unhinged. We talked to a specialist in Miami. They have a wonderful long-term psychiatric facility upstate. You can go there, rest your mind, and get the heavy medication you clearly need. The audacity of her gaslighting was breathtaking. She was actually going to look me in the eye, rewrite history, and commit me to a mental asylum to steal my property. I looked past her to my parents. Mom, Dad, I asked, keeping my voice intentionally soft and weak. Are you really going to let her do this? Are you going to let her lock me away? My mother refused to meet my gaze. She reached out and picked an imaginary piece of lint off Trent's sleeve. Aisha, please stop being so difficult, Brenda sighed. Your sister and Trent are graciously trying to clean up the mess you made. You have always been prone to these dramatic outbursts. You clearly need professional supervision. Just sign the papers so we can all move on with our lives. We have a charity gala to attend this evening, and I am exhausted from the flight. The lawyer stepped forward, unclicking a silver fountain pen and holding it out to me. Miss Wilson, if you would just sign the highlighted sections, we can facilitate your transfer to the care facility immediately. I did not take the pen. I just stared at Trent. He let out a harsh, mocking laugh and reached into his linen pocket. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and tossed it directly onto my chest. You think you have leverage here? Trent sneered, leaning over the bed rail to get close to my face. Look at that paper, Aisha. That is your hospital bill. $85,000. You do not have health insurance. You do not have a real job. You braid hair and play on your computer. You could work for the next 50 years and never be able to afford the medical care you just received. He pointed a thick finger at the bill. I paid it, he declared, puffing out his chest with absolute superiority. I walked down to the billing department 10 minutes ago, and I cleared your entire balance. I just saved you from medical bankruptcy. So you are going to pick up that pen, and you are going to sign over the deed to that useless brick house. Because the way I see it, I just bought your life. You owe me. Silence descended on the room. Vanessa smiled a triumphant, wicked smile. My mother looked relieved that the business transaction was finally concluding. The lawyer tapped the pen against the clipboard impatiently. They had cornered the helpless, broken black sheep of the family. They expected me to cry. They expected me to break. They expected me to sign away my heritage and my freedom just to escape their suffocating cruelty. I looked at the $85,000 receipt resting on my chest. Then I looked at the IV tube taped to the back of my hand, pumping saline into my veins. Very slowly, I reached over with my left hand. I caught the edge of the medical tape and ripped it off my skin in one swift motion. Aisha, what are you doing? Vanessa snapped, taking a sudden step back. I ignored her. I gripped the plastic hub of the IV needle and pulled it smoothly out of my vein. A small bead of dark crimson blood welled up on the back of my hand. I let it drop onto the pristine white hospital sheets. I pushed the heavy blankets off my legs and swung my feet over the side of the mattress. My broken ribs screamed in protest, a fiery, blinding pain that threatened to buckle my knees, but I refused to show them even a fraction of a wince. I planted my bare feet on the cold linoleum floor. I placed my hands on the edge of the mattress and pushed myself up. I stood to my full height. I rolled my shoulders back, stretching my neck, letting the bones pop loudly in the quiet room. I was wearing a cheap cotton hospital gown covered in bruises, but as I locked eyes with Trent, I made sure he felt the sudden freezing shift in the power dynamic of that room. I reached down, picked up the billing receipt, and smoothed it out between my fingers. That is very generous of you, Trent, I said, my voice completely stripped of the weakness I had been faking for 5 days. It was smooth, cold, and entirely lethal. But tell me something. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. He instinctively took a step back, his arrogant smirk faltering just a fraction. "Which credit card did you use to pay this $85,000 bill?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Did you use the platinum card? Or did you use the black corporate card tied directly to your primary development firm?" Trent's arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by a flicker of genuine confusion. He glanced at Vanessa, then back at me, his jaw clenching as he tried to process how I could possibly know the color or classification of his corporate accounts. Before he could formulate a suitably condescending reply, the heavy silence in the room was shattered by the sharp click of my mother's tongue. Beatrice stepped forward, pushing past Trent and Vanessa to stand directly at the foot of my bed. She carried herself with the rigid, self-righteous authority of a woman who cared more about her standing on the church deacon board than the fact that her daughter was standing in front of her covered in dark bruises. She pointed a manicured finger directly at my face, her voice dropping into a harsh, venomous hiss that she usually reserved for disciplining me when I was a child. "Do not speak to your brother-in-law with that disrespectful tone, Aisha," she demanded, her eyes flashing with pure malice. "He is trying to save you. He is trying to salvage a useless discard like you and offer you a way out of the mess you created. Have you not embarrassed this family enough? We have spent years making excuses for your failures, trying to hide your erratic behavior from the congregation and the community. Sign the papers right now. Because if you do not, I promise you I will personally stand before a judge and testify that you are completely unhinged. I will make sure you are locked away in that psychiatric ward so quickly your head will spin." I stared at the woman who had given birth to me. For 32 years, a threat like that from her would have crushed me. It would have sent me spiraling into apologies and tears, begging for her validation, desperate to avoid being labeled the crazy one in a family obsessed with perfect optics. They were all watching me, waiting for the familiar break, waiting for my shoulders to slump, for my eyes to fill with tears, for me to silently accept the pen and sign away my life just to keep the peace. But I did not cry. I did not even blink. I just looked at her with a calm, surgical detachment, recognizing her for exactly what she was. A woman willing to sell her own flesh and blood for a luxury condo and a seat at the country club. I reached over to the bedside table, but I did not pick up the pen. Instead, I pressed the nurse call button, holding it down for 3 long seconds. The door swung open almost immediately. The head nurse stepped into the room. She was a seasoned professional who had been coordinating with my team for the past 48 hours. She did not look at my parents. She did not acknowledge Trent or his expensive lawyer. She walked straight to my side, holding a sleek digital tablet. Vanessa scoffed, crossing her arms and rolling her eyes. "Oh, wonderful. The nurse is here. Please tell the doctor to get the sedatives ready. My sister is having an episode and needs to be prepared for transport." The head nurse stopped and turned slowly toward Vanessa, her expression completely flat. "I am afraid I cannot do that, ma'am," the nurse said, her voice echoing clearly off the sterile walls. "Miss Wilson is not having an episode, and she is certainly not being prepped for transport." Trent stepped forward, his face turning an angry shade of red. "Listen here, I am paying for this room and I have the medical power of attorney. You will do exactly as I say." The nurse looked at him with mild amusement. "Actually, sir, you are not paying for this room, and your power of attorney is completely invalid. The patient was officially discharged with a clean bill of neurological health 3 days ago. She has been medically cleared to leave at any time." The color drained from Vanessa's face. My mother took a sudden step back, her hand flying to her chest. Trent opened his mouth to speak, but the nurse cut him off, delivering the final crushing blow. "Miss Wilson is only standing in this room right now because she specifically requested to stay and wait for you all to arrive." The illusion of their absolute power shattered in an instant. The heavy, suffocating control they thought they held over me evaporated into the sterile hospital air. They were staring at me as if they were looking at a ghost, but I was not finished. This was merely the introduction. I raised my hand and gave a subtle 2-finger gesture toward the open doorway. 2 men in sharp, dark suits stepped into the hospital room. They were not doctors. They were not hospital security. They were my personal cybersecurity directors, and they moved with a precise, intimidating efficiency that instantly made Trent's corporate lawyer look like a frightened amateur. One of the men walked directly to the rolling tray table at the foot of my bed. He did not say a word as he unzipped a black leather folio and dropped a gleaming iPad onto the flat surface. The screen was illuminated, displaying a live scrolling ledger of financial transactions. I looked at Trent, watching the arrogant Miami tan completely vanish from his skin, leaving him looking pale and terrified. "You see, Trent," I said, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "The reason I asked which credit card you used is very simple. Because that black corporate card you just proudly swiped at the billing department down the hall was declined exactly 10 minutes ago." Trent snatched his smartphone from his tailored linen pocket, his thumb jabbing at the screen with frantic, aggressive strikes. The arrogant sun, kissed flush of his Miami tan, instantly gave way to a sickly mottled red. He pulled up his banking application, his eyes darting back and forth as he stared at the red notification blazing across his screen. He refreshed the page once, then twice, his breathing growing shallow and rapid in the quiet hospital room. "Did you honestly believe I spent the last 5 years of my life sitting in the dark, feeling sorry for myself?" I asked, taking another slow, deliberate step toward him. My bare feet moved silently against the cold linoleum. "Did you and Vanessa really convince yourselves that I dropped out of Spelman College? Because I could not handle the pressure, I did not leave because the coursework was too hard. I left because the curriculum could not keep up with what I was already building." Vanessa let out a sharp, hysterical laugh, tossing her braided hair over her shoulder. She turned to our mother, desperate to maintain her illusion of superiority. "Mom, listen to her. She is completely unhinged. The doctor was right, her brain is swelling. She is standing here in a hospital gown, hallucinating about credit cards and businesses." I did not look at my sister. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Trent, watching the realization slowly begin to crack his foundation. "That secure billing portal you just tried to run your maxed-out corporate card through?" I continued, my voice smooth and lethal. "I wrote the source code for it, in the basement of grandfather's house. The house you are trying to steal. That portal is operated by Synapse Health, a telehealth and medical financial logistics platform that currently processes transactions for over 400 medical facilities across the Southeast." Trent lowered his phone, his jaw working silently as he tried to formulate a response. "I am the sole founder of Synapse Health," I stated, letting the words drop like heavy stones into the sterile air. "And I hold exactly 80% of the controlling shares. As of the closing bell on Friday, right while I was bleeding on the concrete stairs, my company reached a valuation of $400 million. Vanessa scoffed loudly, stepping forward and waving her hand in my face. "You are insane, Aisha. 400 million. You drive a used Honda and you buy your clothes on clearance. You do not have a dime to your name. Trent, tell the lawyer to get the psychiatric hold paperwork ready right now. I am not listening to the delusions of a broke, jealous failure for one more minute." I did not need to answer her. The silence from Trent's high-priced corporate lawyer did the talking for me. The lawyer was standing by the rolling tray table, staring down at the iPad my cybersecurity directors had placed there. His face had turned the color of old parchment. His hands, which had previously held his briefcase with such rigid authority, were now visibly trembling. He swiped across the illuminated screen, pulling up the state business registry, the SEC filings, and the hospital's vendor contracts. "Vanessa, shut up," the lawyer whispered, his voice cracking. "Excuse me," Vanessa snapped, her eyes widening in outrage. "You work for us. Do not tell me to shut up." The lawyer did not look at her. He slowly rotated the iPad, turning the screen so Trent could see the brightly lit documents. "Trent," the lawyer said, his voice barely audible over the rhythmic beeping of my heart monitor. "She is not lying. The corporate registry confirms it. Aisha Wilson is the majority shareholder of Synapse Health, and there is a secondary filing here from this morning." The lawyer swallowed hard, looking at me with a mixture of absolute terror and profound respect. "She executed a leveraged buyout of the hospital's parent company," the lawyer stammered, looking back at Trent. "She did not just process your payment. She owns a 30% stake in Atlanta General. You are standing in her building." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of a carefully constructed reality imploding. My mother Beatrice let out a small, strangled gasp, her manicured hands flying up to cover her mouth. She looked at me as if she were seeing a complete stranger, the daughter she had written off as a useless disgrace, suddenly transformed into a titan of industry right before her eyes. My father stood frozen by the door, his phone slipping from his grasp and clattering loudly onto the floor. Vanessa staggered backward, her designer sunglasses slipping off her head and falling to the linoleum. She shook her head frantically, refusing to process the data right in front of her. "No," she muttered, her voice high and panicked. "No, that is impossible. She is lying. She is just a dropout. She is nothing." But Trent was not looking at Vanessa. He was staring at me, his chest heaving as a dangerous, desperate rage took over his features. The realization that he had just tried to financially intimidate a woman worth hundreds of millions of dollars shattered his fragile ego. He was a cornered animal, and like all cornered animals, he lashed out with the only weapon he thought he still possessed. He lunged forward, stopping just inches from my face, the smell of his expensive cologne mixed with the sour scent of his nervous sweat. "Do you think this changes anything?" Trent roared, his voice echoing violently off the hospital walls. "Do you think I care about your little software company? My development firm is a machine, Aisha. We build cities, we reshape skylines. You can play CEO all you want, but you cannot stop my real estate project." He pointed a shaking finger at my chest. "I have the city zoning board in my pocket," he spat. "I have the municipal judges lined up. We are pushing the Sweet Auburn gentrification project forward, and we are bulldozing your grandfather's crumbling brick eyesore whether you sign that deed or not. I do not need your 50% share anymore." Trent stepped back, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair, desperately trying to reclaim his dominance. He puffed out his chest, a wicked, triumphant sneer returning to his lips. "You think you won today because my credit card bounced?" Trent laughed harshly. "You are a fool. Yesterday afternoon, while you were lying here in a coma, I secured the final piece of the puzzle. I received a $50 million capital injection. The board of directors at Apex Corporation gave my development firm the official green light. They are backing my project. With their endless capital and their team of ruthless corporate litigators, we will use eminent domain to rip that property right out of your hands. You cannot fight Apex, Aisha. Nobody fights Apex and wins. They are the biggest private equity firm on the East Coast." I stood perfectly still. I did not flinch at his shouting. I did not shrink away from his physical intimidation. I just watched him gloat, letting him dig his own grave deeper with every single word. I let the silence stretch out, allowing his desperate bravado to echo and fade into the cold corners of the room. Then I smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the cold, calculated smile of a predator watching its prey step willingly into a steel trap. Apex Corporation. I repeated slowly, letting the name roll off my tongue. A massive, notoriously aggressive private equity firm. A firm known for crushing its competitors, hiding its assets behind complex shell companies, and operating with a highly secretive, reclusive board of directors. I took one final step toward Trent, completely erasing the distance between us. My eyes locked onto his unblinking and entirely merciless. "Tell me something, Trent," I whispered, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. "When you were on your knees yesterday begging their board of directors for a $50 million lifeline to save your over-leveraged, bankrupt real estate firm, did you ever bother to find out who the hidden CEO of Apex Corporation actually is?" Trent stared at me, the color draining entirely from his sunburned face, leaving a sickly mottled ash in its wake. For a fraction of a second, the absolute terror of a man realizing his entire existence was built on a trapdoor flashed in his pale eyes. He looked at the iPad on the tray table, then up at me, his chest rising and falling with panicked, shallow breaths. But Trent was a creature of unearned generational privilege. When backed into a corner, his instinct was not to retreat or concede. His instinct was to bulldoze. He let out a loud, forced laugh, clapping his hands together as he paced a tight circle at the foot of my bed. "You think you can play me?" Trent shouted, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "You think a few tech shares and a lucky corporate buyout make you a player in my world? You are nothing, Aisha. You are a ghetto success story who got lucky with an app." I sit on the board of the City Planning Commission. I golf with the mayor. I fund the re-election campaigns of the very judges who will sign the eminent domain orders for that property. You cannot touch me with your little startup money. He stepped closer, his face twisting into an ugly, condescending sneer, completely dropping the polite corporate facade he had maintained for my parents. That sweet Auburn property is a slum, he spat, his voice echoing in the small room. It is a decaying, crime-ridden relic of a forgotten era. It is a blight on this city. I am doing your people a favor by paving over it. I am bringing actual tangible value to a neighborhood that has not been worth a dime in 50 years. I am upgrading it. And no one, especially not a stubborn, arrogant girl playing CEO, is going to stop my bulldozers. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch at his racial coding or his blatant disrespect for the community that had built my family. I simply looked at one of my cybersecurity directors and gave a brief nod. The director tapped the screen of the iPad. "You are not upgrading anything, Trent," I said, my voice cutting through his rant with absolute chilling calm. "You are a parasite. And you are not nearly as smart as you think you are. You see, when you operate a digital health platform that processes data for hundreds of hospitals, you learn a lot about data security. And when you decide to investigate the man trying to steal your grandfather's legacy, you learn exactly how careless he is with his own digital footprint." The iPad screen shifted from the financial ledger to a simple black audio playback screen. "Let us listen to your grand vision for this family, Trent," I said. "Let us hear exactly how much you value my sister and my parents." The audio file began to play. The sound quality was crystal clear, captured directly from a closed-door Zoom meeting Trent had conducted from his home office 3 weeks ago. The sound of ice clinking in a Scotch glass filled the hospital room, followed immediately by Trent's unmistakable arrogant drawl. The recording played out loud and clear. "I do not care if that crazy bitch falls down the stairs and breaks her neck." Trent's recorded voice echoed off the sterile walls. "In fact, it would make the property transfer a hell of a lot easier. Her family is desperate for the cash. They are pathetic. They follow me around like starving dogs just because I pay for their dinners." Vanessa froze. The haughty, irritated expression she had been wearing instantly shattered. She stared at the iPad, her mouth slightly parted in shock. My father let out a quiet gasp, stepping back until his shoulders hit the wall. The audio kept playing. "Once the demolition is approved and the Apex money hits the holding account." "I am done with this charade." Trent's recorded voice continued, laughing cruelly with the unseen men on the other end of the call. "I am serving Vanessa with divorce papers the very next morning. I am taking the $50 million, liquidating the local assets, and heading straight back to Florida. I am absolutely exhausted from dealing with this stupid, high-maintenance woman and her delusional social climbing parents. They actually think they are my equals. It is a joke." The cybersecurity director tapped the screen, cutting the audio off, leaving the room trapped in a suffocating, ringing silence. The perfect illusion of my sister's marriage had just been detonated in the middle of a hospital room. Vanessa stood completely immobilized. Her designer handbag slipped from her fingers, hitting the linoleum floor with a heavy thud. She looked at Trent, her eyes wide, brimming with a sudden, devastating realization. The man she had championed, the man she had violently shoved me down a flight of concrete stairs for, had just admitted to planning to discard her like trash the moment he got his hands on my grandfather's land. Trent's face had gone completely white. His jaw worked silently, trying to find a lie, an excuse, a way to spin the undeniable truth of his own recorded words. "Vanessa," he started, taking a tentative step toward her, holding his hands up defensively. "Vanessa, baby, listen to me. That audio is doctored. It is AI. She faked it to tear us apart." Vanessa did not speak. She stepped forward, her movements rigid and mechanical. She closed the distance between them, and with every ounce of fury she possessed, she swung her arm and slapped Trent directly across the face. The crack of her palm against his cheek sounded like a gunshot. Trent stumbled backward, his hand flying up to his reddening face, his eyes flashing with sudden violent anger. "You bastard!" Vanessa screamed, her voice tearing at the seams. "You used me. You made me fight my own sister. You made me push her. I gave you everything. I handed you my half of the deed. And you were going to leave me with nothing." The polished country club facade of my brother-in-law completely vanished. The gentleman real estate developer was gone, replaced by the ruthless, greedy opportunist he truly was. He dropped his hand from his face and glared at her, his lips curling into a vicious sneer. "Oh, grow up, Vanessa," Trent yelled back, taking a threatening step toward her. "You think I actually wanted to be married to you? You think I enjoyed listening to you whine about your credit card limits and your country club gossip? You were a means to an end. You are the easiest, most gullible mark I have ever met. I wanted the sweet Auburn land, and you handed it over because you are too stupid to understand the value of your own inheritance." Vanessa lunged at him again, her perfectly manicured nails aiming for his face, screaming a stream of curses that echoed down the hospital corridor. Trent grabbed her by the wrists, shoving her backwards so hard she stumbled and crashed into the rolling tray table. That was when my mother intervened. But Beatrice did not run to comfort her weeping, betrayed daughter. She did not turn to Trent and demand he leave the room for putting his hands on Vanessa. She did not look at me and apologize for the fact that she had just tried to commit me to an asylum to appease a con artist. Instead, Beatrice rushed to the hospital room door, grabbed the heavy metal handle and slammed it shut, pulling the privacy blinds down with frantic, shaking hands. She spun around to face the room, her eyes wide with sheer panic, her chest heaving. "Stop it!" Beatrice hissed, her voice a harsh, desperate whisper. "Stop this right now! Both of you, shut your mouths!" She hurried over to Vanessa, grabbing her by the shoulders and shaking her roughly, forcing my sister to stop crying. "Are you out of your mind?" Beatrice demanded, glaring at Vanessa, then shooting a furious look at Trent. "Do you want the entire hospital to hear this? Do you want the nurses gossiping about us? Do you want this in the local papers?" "Mom, he is stealing from us," Vanessa sobbed, struggling against our mother's grip. "He is going to divorce me. He called us dogs. I do not care what he called us." Beatrice snapped, her obsession with optics overriding every single maternal instinct she possessed. "We do not air our dirty laundry in public. We deal with family matters behind closed doors. Do not make a spectacle of us for these hospital workers. What will the people at the gala think if this gets out? What will the church say?" "You will compose yourself, Vanessa. And Trent, you will step away from her immediately. We are going to sit down. We are going to renegotiate these contracts quietly, and we are going to preserve the reputation of this family." I watched the entire pathetic display from the edge of my hospital bed. It was a masterclass in toxic dysfunction. My sister's life was falling apart. My life had nearly ended, and my mother was strictly concerned with making sure the neighbors did not find out her son-in-law was a fraud. I looked at the cybersecurity director standing quietly by the iPad. He caught my eye and gave a subtle confirming nod.